When you get to my age, people stop asking you about curveballs. They stop asking about earned run averages, perfect mechanics, or how hard you could throw in the late innings at Dodger Stadium. What they really want to know is what it felt like to stand out there under those lights when baseball still sounded different, when the stadium organ echoed through the night air, and the game moved a little slower than the world around it. And the truth is, the older I get, the less I remember the numbers. I remember people. I remember the sound of spikes on concrete clubhouse floors. I remember sitting quietly before games while other men laughed across the room. I remember old gloves that smelled like dirt and tobacco. I remember train rides, long road trips, empty batting cages before the crowd came in. There was something lonely about being a pitcher in those days. You carried silence with you. Every fifth day, the whole stadium waited to see whether you still had something left in your arm. But there were certain players who made the game feel bigger than pressure. Some of them beat me, some embarrassed me, some stood across the field wearing another uniform while 50,000 people screamed around us. But when I think about baseball now at 90 years old, those are the men I remember most clearly. Not because they were famous, not because the newspapers loved them, because they made me love the game more than I already did. People always ask who the greatest was. That's not an easy thing to answer. Baseball doesn't work that way. Different eras, different burdens, different kinds of greatness. But there were 5 men who stayed with me long after the crowds disappeared. 5 men who reminded me why baseball mattered in the first place. And the first one who always comes back to my mind is Willie Mays. Willie Mays and I were rivals before anything else, Dodgers and Giants. In those days, that rivalry carried real emotion, real pressure. You felt it from the crowd before the first pitch was even thrown. But even inside all that competition, I never stopped admiring Willie. Honestly, nobody played baseball quite like him. Some players looked mechanical, everything rehearsed. Willie looked free. That's the word I always come back to, free. He played with joy during an era when baseball could feel very heavy sometimes. Long seasons, tough travel, pressure from newspapers every single day. Then Willie would step onto the field smiling like he was still a kid playing stickball somewhere in New York. And the amazing part was that the smile never took away from how dangerous he was. As a pitcher, you couldn't relax against Willie for even 1 second. He could beat you in too many ways. If you threw one bad fastball, he could hit it into the seats. If you walked him, he could steal second. If you got a good swing against the Giants, Willie might take the hit away in center field anyway. He made baseball feel alive every inning. I used to watch him between innings sometimes from the dugout, not because I needed scouting reports. I already knew exactly how great he was. I watched because certain athletes remind you why people fall in love with sports in the first place. Willie had that gift, and fans felt it too. Even opposing crowds couldn't fully hate him. They would try, then he'd make some impossible catch, and suddenly the whole stadium was applauding without meaning to. Very few players ever reach that level. The older I get, the more grateful I feel that I shared the field with him during his prime. Back then, all I wanted was to strike him out. Today, I mostly remember the energy he brought into every stadium he entered. Some men put up statistics. Willie Mays made baseball feel joyful. Hank Aaron was one of the quietest superstars I ever saw. That's what made him different. Willie Mays filled a stadium with excitement. Hank filled it with tension. When he walked to the plate, pitchers immediately became careful, not emotional, careful, because Hank didn't need a big swing or a dramatic moment to hurt you. One mistake, one pitch left a little too high, and suddenly the ball was carrying into the outfield seats. And somehow he always stayed calm doing it. I loved that about him. Hank and I were never extremely close personally, but there was deep respect between us. I think a lot of players from that era respected Hank because he carried himself like a professional every single day. No noise, no need for attention. He simply showed up and went to work. His swing reflected his personality too, compact, smooth, efficient. Watching him hit almost looked simple until you realized nobody could stop him consistently for 20 years. That kind of consistency is harder than people think. But what made me admire Hank most had nothing to do with home runs. It was dignity. During the years when he was chasing history, America placed an enormous burden on him. The pressure, the hatred, the ugliness directed toward him would have broken many athletes. Hank just kept playing baseball. That took strength. As a Jewish kid from Brooklyn, I understood enough about prejudice to recognize courage when I saw it. Hank never allowed bitterness to change who he was publicly. He remained steady through all of it, and I honestly think baseball became stronger because of that example. There were games where I felt I executed a pitch perfectly against him, and he still drove it deep into the gap. He would stand on the mound, almost frustrated at how effortless he made greatness look. No wasted motion, no panic, just discipline. That's rare in sports. The older I get, the more I appreciate players who respected the game itself. Hank Aaron respected baseball every single night he stepped onto the field. And baseball is better because he did. Roberto Clemente was impossible to ignore. The first thing people noticed was the arm. I still believe he had one of the greatest throwing arms baseball ever saw. From right field, he could change an entire game with one throw. Runners stopped taking chances when Roberto had the ball in his hand, and pitchers loved that. It felt like having another weapon behind you. But what made me love Roberto had much more to do with the man than the player. There was pride in everything he did. In those years, Latino players did not always receive the respect they deserved in Major League Baseball. Roberto understood that better than anyone. And instead of making himself smaller, he carried himself with even more dignity. He wanted people to respect where he came from, who he represented, and the way he played the game. I admired that deeply. Whenever we crossed paths during all-star events or league gatherings, Roberto always spoke with intensity. Baseball mattered to him, but people mattered even more. He understood that children in Puerto Rico were watching him every night. He carried responsibility with him every time he stepped onto the field. Very few athletes truly understand that kind of influence. And then there was the way he played. Roberto never looked relaxed out there. He attacked baseball. Every swing had force behind it. Every throw looked angry at the air itself. Fans loved him because they could feel how much the game meant to him. Nothing about Roberto felt fake. I remember watching him during batting practice once and thinking there was something different about the sound off his bat. Some hitters produced noise. Roberto produced authority. The ball jumped differently when he hit it. But what I remember most now is the humanity. When Roberto passed away, baseball lost more than a superstar. It lost one of its hearts. Even players who competed against him felt that immediately. There are great athletes, and then there are rare human beings who leave something behind bigger than sports. Roberto Clemente was one of those men. Before Jackie Robinson became a historical figure, he was simply the most fearless player I had ever seen. That's how I remember him first. I grew up in Brooklyn watching Jackie at Ebbets Field, and once you saw him play in person, baseball never looked the same again. The energy changed every time he got on base. Fans stood up. Pitchers became nervous. Infielders rushed throws they normally made easily. Jackie created pressure before the ball was even put in play. He played the game aggressively, almost defiantly, and considering everything he carried, I still don't know how he did it. People today know the history, but living through it felt different. The abuse he took was constant. Crowds, opposing players, reporters, even parts of America itself seemed determined to test him every single night. Most men would have become angry or bitter under that kind of weight. Jackie somehow stayed disciplined. That may be what I admired most about him. As a Jewish kid from Brooklyn, I understood enough about prejudice to recognize courage when I saw it. Jackie carried himself with dignity even when the country gave him every reason not to. He changed baseball, but he also changed the people watching it. And he still played brilliantly through all of it. People forget how intelligent Jackie was on the field. He understood pressure better than almost anyone. Once he reached base, the entire defense became distracted. He forced mistakes without even swinging the bat. That kind of mental pressure changes games completely. Older Dodgers players still talked about Jackie years after he retired, not because they were told to, because his presence stayed with people. He demanded intensity from everyone around him simply by existing. At this age, I think about that more than statistics. Jackie Robinson carried more pressure than any athlete should ever have to carry. And somehow he still played beautifully through all of it. Don Drysdale was more than a teammate to me. He was family. People always talked about how different we were, and they were right. Don loved attention. I avoided it whenever I could. He was loud, funny, confident. I was quieter, more private, more comfortable, staying out of the spotlight. But somehow those differences made the friendship stronger. We balanced each other. Baseball can become lonely for pitchers. People see the crowds and the fame, but they don't see the isolation that comes with carrying a team every fourth or fifth day. There's pressure that follows you home, pressure that stays with you late at night after bad games. Don understood that better than anyone because he lived it too, and he never let me carry it alone. Some of my favorite memories in baseball happened far away from the field. Long road trips, late night conversations in hotel rooms, clubhouse jokes after difficult losses. Don had a way of making pressure feel lighter around the team. That mattered more than people realized. Fans remember him as intimidating, and he absolutely was. Hitters feared him for a reason. Don pitched with anger sometimes. He wanted opposing hitters uncomfortable from the first inning, but off the field he was warm, loyal, and incredibly protective of the people he cared about. That's the Don Drysdale I remember most. One thing I'll always appreciate was how loyal he stayed during difficult moments. During our contract holdout in the 1960s, we stood together instead of allowing the organization to divide us. In those days, players had very little power. Loyalty between teammates mattered. Don understood that instinctively. As I've gotten older, I've realized something important. Eventually, athletes stop missing the games themselves. What they truly miss are the people, the conversations, the laughter, the feeling of belonging somewhere with men who understood your life completely. Nobody understood my baseball life better than Don Drysdale. Fans remember his strikeouts. I remember his friendship. When people ask me about baseball now, they usually expect stories about winning. The truth is, the older I get, the less I think about victories. I think about people. I think about Willie Mays smiling in center field while 50,000 fans watched him like he was larger than the game itself. I think about Hank Aaron quietly carrying pressure that would have crushed most men. I think about Roberto Clemente playing every inning with pride and purpose. I think about Jackie Robinson changing baseball forever simply by refusing to back down. And I think about Don Drysdale sitting beside me on long road trips, making the pressure of the game feel lighter than it really was. Those are the memories that stayed with me. Baseball gave me awards, championships, and moments I'll always appreciate. But what mattered most were the people I was lucky enough to share the field with. Great players challenge you. Rare players make you love the game more deeply after you meet them. That's what those 5 men did for me. At 90 years old, I don't spend much time wondering who the greatest player was anymore. There's no real answer to that question. Baseball is too big, too human, too complicated. But I do know this. Some players leave behind statistics. Some leave behind memories. And the very rare ones leave behind gratitude. I was lucky enough to know a few of those men.